Hello and welcome to Mind, Body, Sleep, the podcast for anyone out there who wants to understand and recover from insomnia using a holistic perspective. I'm Beth Kendall, your host. Let's get started. Hello and welcome everyone to another very special episode of the podcast today, because I am so pleased and honored to be sitting down with another Mind, Body, Sleep mentorship alum, and her name is Liz. Welcome, Liz.
Hi, Beth. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I know that you joined the program a while back.
Yeah.
And I'm looking so forward to this discussion because I know just from personal experience how your perspective and relationship with insomnia can change over time. And once you're a little bit further out from the experience, you start to see iterations of your own journey, right? So, and you have a unique perspective because you came through a while back. Mm-hmm. And then you were a goodwill ambassador in the community for quite some time. So you would pop in and out and offer support and guidance. And I had the benefit as a coach of being able to watch that evolution in you. And I know that in your work in the world, you use many of the concepts that we explore in the mentorship. So if you wouldn't mind giving the listeners some context and just sharing a bit about you, how insomnia started, and what that was like for you.
For sure. Yeah. So I am a psychotherapist, interestingly enough. Yeah. And I think that perspective really, in different ways, impacted my own experiences. I was experiencing insomnia and then going through the program. And of course, it really was transformative for me, not only personally, but professionally too, because I think the emotional experiences we have when we're experiencing and recovering from insomnia actually apply to a lot of different things. So it really just was so powerful in the long run. Yeah. So I'll share a little bit about, my own experience with insomnia and kind of how it started, how it developed.
Sure.
So for me, the story had sort of a slow burn and a windy road that was over decades before it really kind of hit a crisis point, or what I felt was like a crisis at the time. I had sort of what I would call insomnia light for decades before it really hit a scary place for me. And, at least it just felt scary at the time. Mm-hmm. Even when I was a kid, I had nighttime anxiety and be worried about people breaking into my house. And I had sleep efforts even really young. I had a cassette tape I listened to because, it was in the olden days and I would just listen to it over and over again. That was probably my first sleep effort in retrospect. So then I've had periods of difficulty with sleep sort of on and off throughout my life, but it always sort of came back online. And once it was over, it was sort of in the past. It was gone. It moved through me. Yeah. But in my early 30s, I was kind of getting deeper into my career, and I was just under a lot of pressure. And I love being a psychotherapist, but it's definitely a job that requires a lot of presence and focus. Mm-hmm. And the deeper I got into the career, the more pressure I actually felt to sleep well, because I believed I really needed to be really, really well rested to do my job well.
Yeah.
And as I kind of encountered more challenges like family health crises and work stress and my partner's job loss, the pressure sort of mounted for me to be sort of perfectly rested, to do my jobs well. And the more that got in my head, the more, I sort of started spinning out about it. And so when I would have insomnia, I really felt like it was something that had to be conquered. And then definitely with the background of being a therapist, in the psychology world, CBT-I, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, is the gold star. Everybody talks about it. Yep. And I was trained in that technique for years and years. So I was sort of using that. And the more I used that, the worse it sort of got for me. So then, like a few years ago, I actually had like a health crisis. And this was my first kind of really significant health crisis as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And I like went for treatment and I got diagnosed, but I got sort of a bad treatment recommendation. And this is seems unrelated to insomnia, but the way it sort of affected it was like I had a long time of being sort of like not misdiagnosed because I was diagnosed right, but like the plan wasn't good. And it ended up meaning that like something was really wrong with me for a pretty significant period of time. And it was really impacting my life. But I was sort of told, like, it's no big deal. Let's just wait to intervene. And that really had a pretty significant impact on my relationship with trust
Mm-hmm.
of my body and
Mm-hmm.
also of like my trust with helping professionals, even, right?
Yeah.
Because I was like in such a bad physical shape and seeking help and kind of being told to just wait it out, even though I was struggling pretty badly.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that was just sort of like brewing in the back of my psyche.
Yeah.
And then like about a year after I got treated properly for that health issue and I was doing better, one night I was in bed reading and I felt my heart start to race. And I wasn't thinking about anything. Like I would not have labeled it as anxiety. Like I was like pretty at ease and calm, but for some reason my heart started racing and I thought like, oh, that's weird. And then either that night or a few nights later, as I was lying down, I could feel my heart beat in my ears, like so much
Mm-hmm.
so that like the sound of it prevented me from falling asleep because it was so loud.
Mm-hmm.
And then it happened another night and again. And eventually the sensations like sort of evolved to the point where they'd prevent me from sleeping at all. And I'd have these physical symptoms, which now, of course, I know was hyperarousal, but they would last all night.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went one full night without sleeping at all, and
Mm-hmm.
then
Yeah.
two, and
Yeah.
then three. And then I would sleep, but then I would be scared about it the next week, and the cycle would repeat. So for probably about a year, I was having 1 to 3 nights a week where I felt like I wasn't sleeping at all.
Yeah.
And so then I started becoming afraid of not sleeping. And I also started to like be afraid of fear. And
Mm-hmm.
I was worried that something was wrong with me physically and it was being missed kind of because I had had that health experience before.
Yeah.
And this was sort of really my crisis point was when I was going, 1 to 3 days with what felt like I wasn't sleeping at all.
Yeah.
And it was really, really tough.
Yeah. Okay. Let's pause here because there's so much to talk about already.
Yeah, sorry.
No, no, no. It's so good. I mean, I can relate to so much to your experience right away when you said, I always had like insomnia light. I've never,
Yeah.
that's a good way. It's like not a Miller light, we're talking
Right,
Miller light.
exactly.
Like it's not the full blown, but that's kind of how my experience felt as well. And then, where maybe you had these sensitivities or you had these like subtle sleep efforts kicking in, or maybe there was
Yes.
just like a lot of prone to worry in the background. And maybe wondering like, why do I seem to be a more sensitive sleeper than everyone else or whatever was going on there. And then you went, you got into your 30s and then the pressures kind of mounted. And that's probably when that idea of, or a little belief or decision was made in your mind that I have to be really well rested to be present, and be good at my job. And, that's kind of probably where that imprint was kind of took hold, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then, you said that a couple of years after that, then that health struggle came on the scene. And boy, do I relate to how you describe kind of getting, knocked out of your trust, like that trust with your body, like you just trust in your biological just systems. And I think that's so relevant, especially in the mentorship. I talk a lot about trust and reconnecting with that trust and remembering that trust. So I thought that was really, really huge too. And so at what point did you do the CBT-I? Was that before or after the health challenge?
So
When
that
did that?
was after. So
Okay.
the like acute peak of insomnia that I'm describing happened about a year after I had been treated and recovered from the
From the
health
health
challenge,
struggle.
actually.
Okay.
So then I did CBT-I probably about 6 months into this sort of like acute insomnia crisis.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So you were describing the heartbeat, the physical, the somatic expressions of this fear that you were having. So tell us more how things went from there.
For sure. So I started with my primary care doctor, of course,
Yep.
and I went to her. And actually, I think I went to her probably first when I was having more like insomnia light, right? And so
Yeah.
insomnia light for me is like, I'm having difficulty falling asleep. It takes me a couple hours to fall asleep, but I'm
Yep.
not having intense hyperarousal about it. Like I
Yep.
just am not falling asleep when I'm intending to fall asleep. So that was very common for me. At some point in that, I went to my primary care for help with medication, and she gave me something, and it would help at first, but then in retrospect, I didn't know it at the time, but my hyperarousal would just override the meds. And
Mhm.
I know you've had that experience too. And I know a lot of people in the mentorship have, but
Yep.
it would help for a little bit. And then the hyperarousal would just override it. And so it scared me,
Yeah.
especially in the peak of my crisis, that I could take some really intense sleep meds and not sleep at all.
Yeah.
It just sort of fed this fear, this belief that something was wrong with my brain.
Yeah.
And my doctor, who I love, was also totally freaked out by what was happening to me.
Yeah.
And her being freaked out freaked
Yeah.
me out even more.
Yeah.
And then that impacted my ability to trust my body even more. When you're seeking help and
Yeah.
your provider is like, I don't know what this is, dude. And either they're like, you're making it up, like they gaslight you, or they're just like freaked out for you because they don't understand what's happening.
Yeah.
It's just very alarming when you're turning for medical help, and
Hmm.
it goes beyond their like how the way they
Understanding.
understand it. Yeah, their
Yeah.
understanding, right? So then, we had to rule out all of the medical stuff, right? So,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of people in the mentorship have this progression.
Yeah.
I got sent to sleep medicine. We did a Holter monitor to make sure my heart was okay since I was describing heart palpitations.
Yeah.
I did a sleep study. And the sleep study clinician, interestingly, just like really did not know how to respond compassionately to someone who
Yeah.
is in such a desperate place with
Yeah.
insomnia. And like at this point, I've been to my primary care. Now I'm in sleep medicine. And like she was mean to me. I don't know how to say
Mhm.
it. Like it
Yeah.
was like the mystery of what this was like made her angry. And she just offered me, like more medication. And that was not, necessarily what I was looking for at that point.
Yeah.
So it was frustrating. And then, of course, she suggested I do CBT-I,
Hmm.
which I hated
Yeah.
because I'd trained as a therapist extensively in CBT. So I knew so much about CBT.
Yeah.
And, at that point, too, I had actually moved away from CBT as a modality in my own practice because it wasn't aligned with my values anymore. So it was a tough pill to swallow to be like, girl, you got to go to CBT-I. But I was so desperate.
Yeah.
I was like, whatever, I'll just do it. And then, that poor therapist, like, it was not a super fun time. I think I was not her typical I was not her typical client, but we did CBT-I for a bit, and like a lot of people in the mentorship, the focus on behavior, tracking, control,
Yeah.
changing thoughts, just like really made everything worse for me. And the sleep related behaviors that I had were always, quote, excellent. Like I had great sleep hygiene. I knew all about sleep
Yeah.
hygiene. I was a sleep hygiene
Expert.
whiz,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that process just like ultimately made me more focused on like tracking and sleep efforts, and it just like fed into the fear that this is the gold standard treatment and I hate it and it's not working, and I was just super freaked out.
And that
And
is such
then,
that isn't that a hard
oh,
place to be in because of the reputation that CBTI has, and you're doing it, and you have the unique experience of knowing so much about CBT in general. And
yes.
then you feel like, what am I going to do if this doesn't work? And doesn't it just kind of blow your mind in general how unaware the mainstream is on just this word hyperarousal?
Yes.
I never even heard the word
Never.
hyperarousal in my
Never.
entire 40 plus year,
Right?
experience. And if somebody had just said, here's what's going on, and this is what's overriding the meds, and there's nothing wrong with your brain. You've just developed this, it would have changed the trajectory of the whole experience. So I feel you, girl. I feel you about that whole, when you were talking about the doctors and just feeling a little bit, gaslit or made to feel like you're the one who's crazy because they don't understand how insomnia works and the whole thing. Like, I totally get it. Okay, so you were saying you're in the middle of
Yeah.
CBTI and you're knowing this is not for you. And okay, keep going.
Yeah. And it was so tough. So absolutely. I was really panicked at this point because I'm like so desperate to figure this out, feel better. And, I went to a really reputable like practice to get this, like all the things. It should have been, everything should have set up for it to be successful. Cause like I had a lot of privilege in that situation because I had knowledge about the field. I could access a good provider, all of that stuff. And so when it was like not working, I was very frightened.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a single colleague. Like I just didn't see my experience reflected back really anywhere. So I felt just insanely alone.
Yeah.
And then I found Mind Body Sleep. I want to say I found it on Instagram. I don't even remember, but I just remember connecting with your energy so much. And then I read all your blog posts and I thought I'd try a consult. And when we talked, you reflected back to me that even though my sleep was sort of slowly coming back online, because it was actually by the time we talked, the sleep was coming back online, but the fear was not going away. And that was a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
But you said to me, I think you've become afraid of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big awakening for me. It was like, okay, Liz, your sleep is coming back online,
Yeah.
but you're afraid of the fear sensations. And I was like, that is exactly right. Like, not only am I afraid of not sleeping, I'm now also afraid of fear.
Yeah. You know what, Liz, I'm just remembering, I remember when we were talking, and what I was hearing you say was that you missed your old nervous system.
I did say that.
Yeah. And I remember,
Yeah.
I remember saying like, I miss my old nervous system. Like, I remember that. And now there was just some fear of fear. Yeah. Yep. I remember
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it makes me feel emotional hearing you say that back. I
Yeah.
remember that, but I
Yeah.
I remember that feeling of like, yeah, of really longing for a version of my nervous system before insomnia.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so understandable. And what many of us, go through in the sort of the after effects of, not that there's always effects, but it's a processing of the experience.
Right, right. And it took like my sleep came back online, but the process of unlearning the fear
Mm-hmm.
took a lot longer. But I think that's also really important for people to know is like you can still have a lot of hyperarousal
Mm-hmm.
and fear
Mm-hmm.
and sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big one. I think that oftentimes people do think, oh, hyperarousal has to be gone, or you have to be really calm all the time, or something like that in order to sleep. And that's not actually true.
Right.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah. So, okay. So you're in the program, you're sort of understanding how you're sleeping better, and you've developed a fear of the fear a little bit, and you're working through that and you're unlearning it. And what was that process like for you? Or what were some
Mm,
of the insights or realizations that you maybe had along the way that helped you through that?
yeah. Well, The first and most powerful lesson is probably one that's true for a lot of people, which is just the simple word hyperarousal
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Totally.
beginning to understand what that means. And, you know, especially being in the psychology field, I still can't understand how I, I didn't, we talk in the mental health world about like hypervigilance, like when we're talking about PTSD, but the word hyperarousal is not used as much. And if it was, it would be like a trauma word. And
Hmm.
so associating that with sleep was just like not at all on the docket. So learning about that word and what that word means was just really, really powerful. And I don't want to make it seem like I learned what that word means and like everything was fine, because that's definitely not true. But just like
Yeah.
really understanding, you know, there's nothing wrong. Like
Hmm.
your body has gone into overprotective mode
Yeah.
was just really super, super important for me, as was learning about, I like to use language tolerating wakefulness because I never really learned to
Yeah.
befriend it,
Yeah.
but like showing the nervous system safety even when you're awake and you don't want to be,
Yeah.
and doing that to tolerate or be okay being awake
Yeah.
even when you don't want to be. Like, how can you show yourself kindness when you're experiencing something that feels painful or difficult or hard, was another really important one.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are all so good. So good. And I know in our conversation recently, just through email, you had the interesting observation of realizing that you don't necessarily have to work through past circumstance or past events. Or how did you put that? But I was going to bring
Yeah.
that up today because I thought that was so, so key.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in my own experience, like the experience with insomnia actually for me was, it's not a trauma, but for me, it was sort of a manifestation of other traumas that I'd been through, right? So I'd like had this health crisis and I'd had other sort of developmental trauma and had always sort of gotten through it, like moved through it. My brain knew it was over and I would move on. And then this experience sort of tipped me into this loop
Mm-hmm.
of fear that I couldn't get out of. And then, in treating my own clients, like I see this with them too, like people who maybe have OCD or post-traumatic stress disorder or depression or anxiety, and they may have some co-occurring insomnia too. But what I learned through my own experience and through working with my own clients is that those issues do not need to be resolved or healed to
Yeah.
recover from insomnia. The
Mm-hmm.
principles and the mentorship, I think, are so fundamental. And I think that's so important, especially because a lot of us in this mentorship have like perfectionist
Yep.
energy,
Yep.
And so
Yeah.
we like think, oh, I've got to be healed to sleep. And it's like, actually, we don't. We can use these things
Yeah.
to get ourselves to a safer place. And there, like in my own case, there was more healing to do that was sort of not unrelated to the insomnia, but adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
And I continued to do that work, but I didn't need to do that before I started to sleep again. And I
Yep.
think that just was so important for me to understand, and hopefully is helpful for people to know.
Yeah, I think it will be very, very helpful for people to know that because I get asked all the time, people that might be considering coming in that have like coexisting conditions. Maybe they have chronic pain, maybe they
Right.
have a past trauma, and, they might think, oh, well, I've got to get this chronic pain resolved or I've got to work through this trauma before I can, work on my sleep. And, something like chronic pain or a difficult circumstance can be the thing that maybe triggers a fear-based relationship with sleep, but it doesn't have to be the thing that maintains it. And I'm always like trying to pull these two apart because you really don't have to resolve those things, just like you said, in order to start sleeping well again. Yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. And I can completely see that with chronic pain. I know in the program too, like there was maybe someone with tinnitus, which is like that
Yep.
chronic ringing in the ears. And
Yep.
I think that's like a similar, like, how do I get my symptom of tinnitus under control so I can sleep again? And I think it's so helpful to be like, we can accept and tolerate this sensation and lower the fear and create safety. And no, it will not take away the ringing in your ears, but it can create some space for sleep to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Well said. A lot of times people ask me, if they're coming at it from a more traditional, and I'm curious if you'll relate to this, like
Yeah.
a traditional therapy approach or thinking of it in terms like that. And I will use the analogy of the architect versus the archaeologist. And I'll just say, I don't work from the archaeologist standpoint, which is, going from the now and going backwards in time and looking into the past. I work more from the architect standpoint of like working from the now forward.
Right. Right.
And so you really don't need to go back and resolve all those past things for sure.
No, no, you don't. And
Yeah.
and you may want to or like need,
Yeah.
desire that at some point, but you still don't need that to have come to fruition
Yep.
to recover from insomnia.
And I think a lot of times insomnia becomes the thing that opens the door for
Mm,
those other things. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's such an incessantly loud issue to deal with because we deal with it, we sleep every night and it
yes.
becomes the opening to working through those deeper issues. Like you said, there was still healing to do, but you can still be sleeping and then move forward or move into that healing. But insomnia oftentimes is the invitation.
That was 1000% my experience. I think had this kind of insomnia not happened to me, I would not probably have done, what I'm doing on my own healing journey. I might have done it eventually for a different reason because I think there was so much I was holding in my body and I didn't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it really ended up being an invitation for something more. And I think it's a hard thing to hold on to when you're in the thick of it, but
Yep.
really has been ultimately pretty transformative for me.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And, I'll just ask my signature question here. Were there any silver linings that came? You kind of just described one with that invitation, but any other silver linings that came from the experience that you can think of right now?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, you know, a big pillar of the mentorship is self-compassion.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably one of the pieces I struggled with the most,
Yeah.
which feels a little like ironic, given what I do for a living. I never would have thought that I was short on that because I just extend compassion or I try to people all the time.
Yeah.
But I really just felt like the well was empty with self compassion, as I was going through the mentorship and doing this learning. And, it kind of turned out I didn't have very much self compassion.
Yep.
But I think it made me realize like there's a lot of reasons that one should work on like creating it for yourself, right? Like,
Yep.
Insomnia aside, there's so many things that can come up for us in life. And if we can resource even a little bit of self compassion,
Yep.
we're going to be a lot better off. So, I think I'm not sure I would have discovered that in the way that I did without this experience.
Yeah.
And, it really has paved the way for me to do some deeper work on that and makes dealing with challenges that come up in life as they inevitably will like a lot, I don't want to say easier because that's not really true, but like a lot like softer. There's some
Oh,
softness.
yeah.
And I think that's better.
Oh, I love that. I love that word. I love that you brought up this pillar of self-compassion because it's such a big one. And I've found that oftentimes it's one of the last things that people will really visit. You almost have to be reminded or exposed to that idea many, many times before it really sinks in. And it's
Yeah.
interesting. Like you would think that's something we should just inherently almost almost know for ourselves, but it helps to get the reminders for sure.
Right, it does. And, I think the other piece of self-compassion is really like finding safety
Mm.
in your psyche, in your body again. So I think that was another huge thing for me was like, how do I create safety inside again? And again, a lot of reasons that that is important, insomnia inside, but I'm not gonna lie to you, Beth, like it's still a work in progress, but it's just so important and it, means that I don't know, there's just more emotional and psychological flexibility within
Yeah.
when you can have some degree of self-compassion. It doesn't even need to be like oozing self-compassion, but
Yeah.
even a little bit is powerful. And as is having internal safety.
I agree so much with everything you said. And we're all a work in progress all the time.
Right,
there's no finish line. It's just
right.
evolution. So
That's right.
yeah. Okay. Well, where can people find you, Liz?
Yeah, I have a therapy practice outside of Chicago. It's called Willow Tree Counseling, and the website is www.willowtreecounselingpllc.com.
Wonderful. Wonderful. There's people out there. Liz is amazing. I've seen her work in the mentorship, and certainly if the door has been opened and an invitation to work a little bit deeper, I can tell you she would be absolutely wonderful to work with. I can't thank you enough for being here today.
Yes, it was wonderful. I'm so grateful to you and so glad to chat with you a little bit about the experience and reconnect.
Absolutely. And with that, everyone, thanks for joining us. This is the Mind, Body, Sleep podcast, and we'll see you next time. Have a wonderful summer, Liz.
You as well, Beth.
Thanks for being here today. If you love what you heard on today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the podcast. And if you need more support with your sleep, join me in the Mind, Body, Sleep mentorship. This 3-month one-on-one program will transform your relationship with sleep so you can get back to living the life that you love, free from the fear of not sleeping. Head on over to bethkendall.com for more details. I'll see you next time.